Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something really profound. We're going to take a journey that starts with a localized, just absolutely devastating American infrastructure disaster and follow the threads all the way up to the strict international laws that dictate exactly how we learn from it. We're breaking down the anatomy of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse and exploring the global rulebook that is desperately trying to ensure a tragedy like this never ever happens again. Honestly, it's a fascinating story of physics, global trade, and the hidden math that literally keeps our bridges standing.
Okay, let's dive right into this. In the early hours of March 26, 2024, the unthinkable happened in Baltimore Harbor. The Dali, which is this absolutely massive, 984-foot, Singapore-flagged container ship, was heading out to sea when it suffered a total, catastrophic loss of electrical power and propulsion. Completely dark and entirely unsteerable, this massive vessel drifted and struck Pier 17 of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The collision caused a massive collapse and tragically claimed the lives of 6 construction workers who were just doing routine maintenance on the deck above. It's an event that completely shocked the world. But to truly understand how a steel and concrete structure of this scale could come down like that, we first have to look at how it was designed to defend itself.
Now you might be wondering, was a bridge built back in 1977 just sitting there totally defenseless? Well, actually no. It was built with specific physical protection systems. It featured these huge 28-foot diameter protective dolphins. Basically, these are massive circular barriers positioned about 489 feet away from the central piers, complete with rubber fenders so you don't get metal-to-metal sparking. Then, closer in, the bridge had crushable concrete and timber fendering wrapped right around Pier 17 itself. The engineering logic back in the 70s was pretty straightforward. If a ship strays off course, you use these physical barriers like giant bumpers to slow it down, absorb the shock, or just physically bounce it away from the load-bearing columns.
But here's the catch. To grasp the true risk here, we have to talk about the waterway it spanned. The Fort McHenry Federal Channel is this straight, 700-foot wide, 50-foot deep maritime superhighway. It literally funnels massive global trade vessels right past those bridge piers. And we are talking about a lot of traffic. In 2023 alone, there were 3,775 ocean-going vessel transits right through this tight corridor. Every single one of those trips represents a gargantuan object carrying immense kinetic energy, passing just a few hundred feet from the bridge's critical supports.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because when the worst actually happens in such a vital, busy waterway, how do we figure out what went wrong? We don't just rely on local traffic cops or a couple of local engineers. Shipping is an inherently global industry, right? So there's actually a highly rigid, international framework dictated by maritime law that kicks in to find the absolute truth. Enter the International Maritime Organization, or IMO. They maintain a globally recognized rulebook called the Casualty Investigation Code. Under this code, an incident like the Dali collision isn't just an accident. It is immediately flagged as a very serious marine casualty. The criteria for that is strict: total loss of a ship, severe environmental damage, or, and this is the crucial one here, the loss of human life. Because lives were lost in Baltimore, international law legally mandates an immediate, standardized safety investigation involving both the ship's flag state and the coastal state. And here is where the core philosophy of that IMO rulebook gets incredibly fascinating. Listen to this. Marine safety investigations do not seek to apportion blame or determine liability. I mean, really think about that for a second. In our modern world, which is so obsessed with lawsuits and finding out whose fault something is, the sole objective for these investigators is preventing future disasters, period. These safety investigations have to remain completely independent from civil or criminal trials. By taking the fear of lawsuits off the table, investigators can get the unvarnished truth. It's 100% about uncovering the root causes to save lives down the line.
So the crucial point is how this played out in Maryland. This Global Prevention First mandate dictated exactly how the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, handled the investigation. Staying entirely true to that IMO code, the NTSB didn't focus on who made a mistake. They didn't point fingers at the harbor pilot, the crew, or the bridge operators. Instead, they focused squarely on how the physical infrastructure failed. They basically asked, okay, why didn't those 1970s defenses we just talked about actually stop this from happening?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at how the threat itself evolved. Get this. Back in 1980, the exact same pier, Pier 17, was struck by an off-course ship called the Blue Nagoya. But check out the difference here. The Blue Nagoya was 390 feet long. When it hit, the bridge's crushable fendering system did its job. It stopped the ship and the bridge only suffered minor surface damage. Now, fast forward to the Dali in 2024. This ship is an absolute leviathan at 984 feet long with massive displacement. Over the last few decades, the shipping industry quietly supersized its vessels and completely outpaced the capabilities of that original 1970s infrastructure.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real problem. The size disparity between these two eras of ships is just shocking. Modern megaships like the Dali have roughly 10 times the displacement, 10 times the sheer mass of the vessels the Key Bridge was originally designed to withstand. The physical reality is that a 1970s timber and concrete fender just cannot absorb the kinetic energy of a modern, nearly 1,000-foot-long container ship loaded to the brim with cargo. It's literally like trying to stop a bowling ball with a piece of tissue paper.
So how do modern engineers actually measure this kind of risk? They certainly don't just guess. They use some seriously rigorous math. The NTSB applied a mathematical model called AASHTO Method 2. It's a complex formula used to calculate what's called the annual frequency of collapse, which is literally the probability that a bridge will fall down in any given year from a vessel strike. To get this number, you multiply a bunch of factors: the sheer volume of traffic, the statistical odds of a ship losing steering, the geometry of the channel, the physical pier protections, and finally, the ultimate lateral capacity of the piers. That last one is just engineer speak for what is the absolute maximum sideways force this concrete can take before it simply snaps.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens when the NTSB actually ran that post-collapse math. They broke down the risk pier by pier. Notice the results for piers 17 and 18. Those two specific supports carried almost the entirety of the bridge's structural risk for both inbound and outbound ships. Why? Because they flanked the very edges of that 700-foot channel. An off-course ship of modern, mega-size, had practically zero time to correct its path before slamming into those specific columns.
To really put that math into context, you have to know what a safe number is. The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials has a strict rule. For a critical or essential bridge like the Key Bridge, the acceptable risk threshold is an annual frequency of collapse of 0.0001. When the NTSB crunched the actual numbers for the Key Bridge, factoring in modern shipping traffic against its 1970s defenses, they found its probability of collapse was nearly 30 times greater than that acceptable threshold. 30 times! The bridge was operating at this extraordinarily high, completely unmitigated risk level simply because the world's cargo ships had quietly grown so enormous.
Which brings us to a data point that is frankly terrifying: 68. As part of this investigation, the NTSB zoomed out and looked across the entire United States. They identified 68 other major U.S. bridges crossing navigable waterways frequented by massive ocean-going vessels that were built before 1991. Now, because these bridges predate modern risk assessment guidelines, their owners have never actually been required to do this math. Think about that. Right now, today, there are 68 major American bridges operating with an entirely unknown level of risk.
So, what does this all mean? Will we assess the hidden risks in our waterways before the next collision occurs? This brings us full circle, from a localized, tragic warning right back to the IMO's global mandate of prevention. The data is literally staring us in the face. We have the mathematical models to assess the danger, and the risk of doing nothing is, as we've seen, catastrophic. The real question we have to ask ourselves now is, will authorities use this explainer as a massive wake-up call to do the math and reinforce our infrastructure? Or will we just wait until history and the brutal, unforgiving laws of physics repeat themselves? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this incredibly complex topic. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.